Chapter 19, The Clan of the Watchers. A few awkward seconds passed as a stare-down ensued between Caleb, Martha, and the four young strangers who stood statuesquely on the ridge that rose above the creek. Caleb began thinking that perhaps he was having one of his visions or dreams again, but quickly realized this was not a dream. Seeing the four warrior-like strangers standing on the ridge above him reminded him of the old stories he had read about native people of the Old West who lived long ago. Then one of the four, whom Caleb guessed to be the leader, since he was the tallest and looked the oldest, although it was hard for Caleb to tell exactly, due to the face paint they wore, turned to the others and spoke in a language that was unfamiliar to Caleb. This boy seemed to be sizing up the situation, as Caleb noticed the others pointing over towards Peter, who was still lying on the ground in pain, seemingly unaware of the four strangers who had just appeared. "Sayo, doa Nico," said the older and taller boy, looking at Caleb. "Salagi Siwani?" he asked. Martha and Caleb gave each other a perplexed look. "What did he say, Caleb?" whispered Martha. "I'm not sure. It sounded like they said hello," said Caleb, deciding he had been quiet long enough. "Hi, my name's Caleb, and this is my friend Martha." Instantly, the three younger boys started rattling off questions to the taller boy, who seemed to be doing his best to be patient with them until finally he lifted a hand to stop them. "My name is Nico Ward. I just asked you if you spoke Cherokee, but it seems you can only speak the old language." "There are a few people in my village who still speak it," said Nico, looking over to his three younger companions. "These are my friends, Woolwadi, Quiet John Parker, and my younger brother. We call him Little Bear, but his real name is Eric. They are all still trying to learn the old language." "Would you like some help with your friend?" asked Nico, motioning to Peter. "Please, if you can," pleaded Martha. "He's been bitten by a snake." Nico nodded his head and motioned for his companions to follow him as he walked over to where Peter was lying on the ground. Nico looked down at the leg that Martha had just finished wrapping up earlier with elastic. Nico examined Peter's leg closely, and then looked up at Martha. "We have a doctor in our village who can help him," said Nico, struggling occasionally to find the right words to say in English. "He will need help soon, or he will get sick." "How far is your village from here?" asked Caleb. Nico started to answer, then paused and stumbled over his words, some in Cherokee and then in English. "It's not very far, about an hour if we walk, much faster if we go by horse," said Nico. "Let's go then." "Can you help us get him on his horse?" "Our horses are over in that direction, just a little ways away," motioned Martha. Nico helped Caleb walk his friend Peter to his horse and lift him up onto his saddle. Peter, who was starting to show the first signs of sickness as he complained of difficulty in breathing, suddenly realized they had company. "Caleb, what's going on?" Peter asked. "We have some new friends who are helping us," explained Caleb. "Are you okay, Peter?" Caleb asked. "You were out of it there for a few minutes." "Oh man, my head hurts and I feel kind of woozy," said Peter. "It must be the venom. It will get worse if we don't get you help soon," explained Caleb. "We've just met some people who live nearby who are going to take us to a doctor in their village." Peter nodded. Caleb and his friends followed Nico and his three young companions as they led them across the creek and southwest through the woods to their village, partially following the old highway for a short time, until veering off the roadway onto an unmarked trail. They hadn't gone very far when Caleb noticed an area of trees with the markings on them that he had seen in his dreams. Many of the large trees Caleb saw near the roadway had eyes etched into the side of their trunks. Gazing up into the darkening sky, Caleb guessed it to be nearly 3 or 4 in the afternoon, but with the increasing cloud cover blocking the sunlight, it was hard to be sure exactly what time it was. Sure enough, just like Nico had told them, after a short time they reached a clearing that opened to reveal a large village. As far as Caleb could see, there were dozens upon dozens of homes of various sizes, tents, with cabins and horse stables spread out across the large open meadow. Some of the dwellings appeared to have been around for quite some time and showed their age, as Caleb could see white puffs of smoke rising up from several of the stone chimneys that protruded from the rooftops. The scene before him reminded Caleb of drawings he had seen in some of the old school books that Mrs. Daniels would show the kids of Native Americans who had lived long ago in the Old West. 1,000 questions came to Caleb's mind as they made their way to one of the older homes in the middle of camp. This must be the home of the doctor, thought Caleb, as he decided that his questions would just have to wait until after Peter was taken care of. It was several minutes after they entered the village, before any of the other villagers began to take notice of Nico and his 3 new friends riding along with him. Those who noticed first were the children. They must not have visits by strangers very often, thought Caleb. The children began to follow along behind them as they rode in on their horses. Caleb could hear them talking to each other in the same language that Nico had used earlier and with his 3 companions. Several of the adult women and men also began to take an interest to the visitors as they began to follow behind the children, stopping them from continuing in their pursuit. Caleb could not understand their language, but he did know a little about the history of the Native American Indians of long ago. If these people turn out to be relatives of some of them, thought Caleb, then they would have every right to call this place their home. As they rode through the village, Caleb also noticed that none of the men or women wore any of the face paint like Nico and his companions were wearing. In fact, if it weren't for different language spoken or the colorfully decorated clothing items that were worn by some of the men and women, Caleb would have felt right at home amongst these people. When Nico finally led his horse to one of the homes in the middle of the village, he raised his hand to signal his companions to stop. As he got down from his horse, he motioned to Caleb and his friends as well. "Wait here, I will go in and see if Miss Chelina's busy," said Nico, as he walked to the front of the house and knocked on the door. It opened, then he went inside. Martha leaned over, closer to Caleb, and whispered, "Caleb, look at all those baskets on that table over there, and those big clay pots." Martha pointed to a long table that had been set up outside of what they guessed was Miss Chelina's home, which had several woven baskets along with nearly a dozen painted pots of various colors on the top, that all appeared to be works in progress. "Wouldn't Mrs. Rickton just love to see these?" exclaimed Martha. While they waited for Nico to return, a small group of adult men, appearing to Caleb to be approximately the same age as his father, approached the 3 companions who were waiting for Nico and began to speak to them in what Caleb guessed was Cherokee. Even though Caleb couldn't understand them, he could tell that the men were concerned. The 3 boys began a rapid conversation with the older men, which Caleb decided was a summary of the events of the afternoon from their perspective, while the older men kept turning around as if sizing Caleb's group up. He wanted to say something, but decided it might be better for the time being to just let things play out. Caleb whispered to Martha, "Those men are probably their parents, I'm guessing," he said. Martha nodded. "I hope they aren't in trouble for bringing us here." "I hope we aren't in trouble," said Caleb, keeping a close watch on the conversation. "I'm sure we're going to be in trouble," said Martha, watching the conversation. She then turned to look over at Caleb, who had a strange expression on his face. "What do you mean?" asked Caleb. "Our parents are going to have a fit when we're not back at camp," said Martha. Caleb nodded his head. "Oh, I almost forgot about that." Suddenly, they heard the front door opening up, as Nico, whom they almost didn't recognize, since he apparently had cleaned off all the face paint he was wearing, was followed by an older woman, with long grayish-black hair, came out the door. She looked up towards Caleb and Martha and smiled at them as she then walked around them to get over to Peter, who was starting to look a little flushed in the face. She slowly reached out and carefully took a hold of Peter's foot. "Hello," she said, in a smooth and pleasant voice. "My name is Chelina Ward. I am one of the village healers, or doctors you could say. My nephew Nico tells me that your friend here has been injured." "He was bit by a snake, yes?" she asked, looking up towards Caleb. "Yes, it was a copperhead snake," explained Caleb. "We were taking a rest by the creek, and I guess he didn't see it until it was too late. My name is Caleb Elgin, by the way." Chelina smiled again. "It's nice to meet you, Caleb," she said, looking up at Caleb. Then she looked over again towards Martha. "And what is your name?" "My name is Martha Elgin." "Nice to meet you as well," said Chelina, as she smiled at Martha, then turned towards Peter. "And what is your name?" "My name is Peter Rickton." Do you think you can help me? Peter asked meekly. Well, Peter, I have some medicine inside my home that I can prepare for your leg. It will take me a few minutes to get it ready for you. It will take some time for you to heal enough to travel again. You may rest here until you're better. There might be a little bit of pain and heat for a while, but it will pass, she said, motioning to Caleb and Martha. If you two can help your friend down off of his horse, then bring him inside my home, and I will show you where you can lay him down and get him comfortable. I will then get his medicine ready. Thank you very much for helping us, said Martha. Celina smiled at Martha. You are welcome. I can see that you two have many questions about us. After we take care of your friend Peter, perhaps we can share a cup of hot tea and sit and talk for a little while. Would you two like that? Yes, ma'am, we would love to, exclaimed Caleb and Martha. Very well, bring him inside. Nico and Caleb helped Peter down off his horse and followed Celina as she led them to one of the special rooms in her home that she had set up with a tall wooden cot and several blankets and pillows all neatly arranged around the room on shelves. The cot was built up a little higher than any cot Caleb had ever seen, but he guessed that was to make it easier for Miss Celina to work on sick people. Caleb and Nico helped Peter onto the cot and made him comfortable as Caleb took notice of all equipment stored on the shelves in Miss Celina's special room. All around the room were shelves upon shelves of small, labeled jars, towels and linens stacked and neatly folded, and a large cabinet full of assorted medical equipment that he had never seen before. Caleb began to relax as he realized this was the best place that he and Martha could have brought their friend Peter to get help, as it was beginning to get dark outside, and had they decided not to follow Nico, they would have still been trying to make their way back to camp. To make matters worse, Peter was beginning to show signs of pain and discomfort from his injury. They all watched as Miss Celina began pulling down several small jars and canisters from her shelves. Celina turned and began to speak to Nico in Cherokee for a few seconds before switching back again to English. Nico, take your guests out into the main room and let them sit down and relax. I will be out there in a few minutes after I get this salve prepared for their friend Peter, she explained. Nico nodded and then motioned for Caleb and Martha to follow him. Martha walked over to where Peter was lying down. Peter, we'll be right here if you need us, she said, smiling before her, and Caleb left with Nico and went into the next room. The main room of Celina's house was quite large, with a large low oval wooden table in the middle of the room, along with several wooden chairs all arranged neatly around the sides of the table, along with several dozen large pillows to sit on. Caleb immediately took notice of several paintings that were hung on the walls of the room. They were all paintings of various animals in natural settings. There was a painting of a small deer by a river stream, and another painting of several colorful birds sitting within the branches of a large pine tree. Then there were several tables around the edges of the main room, which had more handmade pots, baskets, and other items scattered on top of them, some that were apparently finished, while others looked to be in the early stages of development. Wow, Nico, your Aunt Celina is really very talented, remarked Martha. Not only a doctor, but then she made all this. Yes, she did. She is one of several artisans we have in our camp. My aunt is sort of like their teacher, you might say, explained Nico, motioning to Caleb and Martha to take a seat. Have a seat, relax. Do you like hot tea? He asked. Martha and Caleb nodded. Good, I will go heat up some water for tea, insisted Nico, who turned quickly and went into a large kitchen area next to the main room that was filled with several cabinets and tables filled from top to bottom with jars and bottles of all sorts of various spices, teas, and other various food items or concoctions. When off to the side of the room, Caleb spotted the immense black cast iron stove. As he followed close behind Nico, Martha continued examining all the paintings that hung on the wall in the main room. How long have you and your people lived here, Nico? Asked Caleb. He was amazed at all he was seeing in every room. These were people who seemed to have been living here for quite some time. Nico raised his eyebrows in amazement. Why, we've lived here for as long as I can remember, said Nico. Since I was a boy, this is the only home I've ever known, he explained. But how did you live here before the ice melted, before it warmed up? Caleb asked. Nico tilted his head and thought. I don't understand. This village is the only home I've ever known. It was colder when I was little, but I remember in the summer seasons, we could out to the river and hunt and fish for a short time, Nico continued. My mother told me that for many years after the flood, our people used to live underground in a large cavern. It was far away from here somewhere to the east. We lived there for many years until everyone voted to come here, but that was before I was born. My family came here from a place called Texas. That's where we lived during the Great Cataclysm, long before I was born. Some of our people stayed there, while the rest of us moved up here last season, explained Caleb, as Nico nodded, then handed him a cup of hot tea. Come, let's go sit. I'll bring some tea for your friend Martha, said Nico, motioning toward the main room. When Nico and Caleb returned to the main room, they found Martha sitting at the oval table across from Chelina, looking over one of her woven baskets that she had been working on. Caleb, you just must see this. Miss Chelina has been showing me how she makes her baskets. I think I could learn how to do this myself, exclaimed an excited Martha. It's really very simple, Martha, and you seem to have an eye for it, and a natural skill as well, said Chelina, continuing with her lesson a little while longer as Nico carefully placed the pot of hot steaming water down onto the table, along with a jar of tea and 4 cups. Thank you, Nico. Why don't you two sit down and relax with us a while, insisted Chelina. Your friend Peter is asleep. I gave him something to calm him for a while in order to let the salve work into his wound. It will need to be changed every couple of hours. You can help me with this. I will show you how to do it in a little while, after we have some tea. Caleb and Martha glanced uneasily at each other. Chelina must have sensed their worry. Don't worry, he's going to be fine. I have plenty of room for all of you to stay here tonight. I live alone now. My children have grown up and have homes of their own in the village. As for my husband, well, he passed away several years ago, and I would enjoy having some company for a while, said Chelina, smiling. Martha leaned over at Caleb and whispered, Now I know we're in trouble. Thank you very much, said Caleb, ignoring Martha and taking a sip of his tea. This is very good. What kind of tea is this? Asked Caleb. It's called sassafras tea. It's one of my favorites, said Chelina, pouring some tea into her cup. So, tell me about yourselves. Do you live far from here? She asked. We live northeast of here, up along the river to the north, said Caleb. They came here from Texas, said Nico. I see. My great-grandmother was born in Texas, said Chelina. Caleb's eyes widened. Really? You're surprised. Well, yes, I guess I am. I just thought that you came from. Caleb paused, looking at Nico. I guess I thought that everyone here came from out west of here somewhere, like Nico said. What Nico told you is true, but that was years after Anastasia. Our original group came from many different places around the country. Many of my distant relatives happened to be born in Oklahoma years ago, and their relatives came from the southern part of the United States. So, is everyone in your village Cherokee then? Asked Martha. Most of us in this village are, though we have several families who are descendants of other tribes as well. We have some families who are Powhatan, Comanche, and even a few Shawnee families. You're not at all what I expected, said Caleb. Taken aback, Chelina smiled. What did you expect, Caleb? Caleb seemed embarrassed slightly. Well, your people aren't anything like we've heard about, or like the Indians that I've read about in some of our books, he explained. Why are the trees all marked with the warning signs etched on them then? Caleb asked. We mark the trees, Caleb, to let people know that this is our land, our homes. And to let them know we will fight to defend and protect it if need be, said Nico. You see, Caleb, when our people first came here to settle this area, we were all alone. It was many years ago, and it was still very cold then, but over the years, as it warmed up, we noticed other groups of settlers beginning to pass through this area. Some were friendly, a few were not. Chelina explained. The tribal elders decided we needed to do something to show outsiders that this is our territory, so they marked all the trees around the perimeter as a borderline and assigned guard duty to the different families and villages. You mean this isn't the only village? Asked Martha. No, we have 5 altogether, 1 for each of the tribes, and one more for those who don't wish to be identified with any tribe in particular, said Chelina. There were many of our people who came here because they longed to return to the ancient ways of life. However, there were many others who had no desire to go backwards, but came here wanting to build something new for our people, a new way of life. What do you believe? Asked Caleb. Chelina smiled and calmly sipped her tea. So, you like to read books, Caleb? Yes, I do. Chelina set her cup of tea on table and went into another room, then returned with 2 books in her hand. Here, Caleb, then you may read these, said Chelina as she laid the 2 books down in front of Caleb, and then sat down and proceeded to finish her tea. They will explain much of who we are and some of our history, she insisted. Caleb reached out and began looking over the 2 books. The Trail of Tears, Caleb whispered aloud as he began to read the book. Flipping through each page as he read feverishly, he then paused and looked up at Chelina. May I keep these for a while? Of course, Caleb, Chelina chuckled. That's why I gave them to you. Thank you, said Caleb, continuing to read through one of the books. Well, I think it's about time to go check on your friend Peter, said Chelina. Martha, come with me and I will show you how to change the dressing on his leg, she insisted. Nico, would you and Caleb get the bed cots set up for everyone? You will find them in the back room, stacked against the wall next to the linen closet. Put 2 in the front room for you and Caleb, and 1 in my room for Martha, said Chelina, looking over at Martha. I figure it will help relieve any fears your parents might have when you return to your camp about where you slept while visiting. She chuckled slightly. Don't forget, I am a mother too. Martha smiled. Caleb and Nico turned and left the main room to go find and set up the cots, while Chelina motioned for Martha to follow her into the medical room where Peter was still laying on the bed, fast asleep. Chelina showed Martha all the intricacies of putting together salves and ointments for a snake-bite poultice. One by one, Chelina would pull down the jars that were needed from her medicine cabinet and then show Martha how to mix and heat the salve to make the poultice. Then, after removing the old poultice, she gently laid a clean cloth across Peter's leg where the snakebite was and showed Martha how to apply the new poultice across the skin. This is amazing, observed Martha. I can't wait to show my mom how to do this. And you say that all of these ingredients we're using can be found around the woods where we live? Yes, I believe you should be able to find most of them, but you might have to do a little hunting for a few of them, said Chelina. Some of them like to hide low near the ground in dark places. Nico and Caleb walked into the medical room where Chelina and Martha were just finishing up with Peter's leg. Aunt Chelina, the cots are ready, said Nico. I need to go home first and tell my mother that I am over here with you, insisted Nico. Caleb, you want to come with me, or stay here and help with Peter? Caleb's eyes widened with surprise. Are you kidding? He thought. Sure. I'll come with you, if that's okay with you, Caleb said, looking at Martha and Chelina. We'll be fine, Caleb, you 2 go on, said Chelina. We're almost done dressing Peter's wound, then Martha and I will continue learning how to weave a basket, Chelina winked. Your cots are all ready. I will place some blankets on them for you 2 in a few minutes. If we're not up when you get back, just help yourself in and make yourselves comfortable. Thanks, Aunt Chelina, we shouldn't be too long, said Nico, as he and Caleb turned to leave. See you in a little while, enjoy your visit, said Chelina, as her and Martha finished up the last of Peter's leg dressing. Before Caleb even realized it, several hours had nearly passed visiting with Nico and his family. Nico had introduced him to his mother Yelena and his younger sister, Charlene, and then he had been invited to play a game of cards that Caleb had never played before called Rummy. Suddenly, Caleb began to realize it had been a long day and he excused himself early to return to Miss Chelena's to go to check on his friend Peter and then go to bed. When Caleb returned, he found Miss Chelena was still up and checking one last time on Peter as Martha was already fast asleep. "Hello, Caleb. Did you and Nico have a good time?" Chelena asked. "Yes, I got to meet his mother and sister, and they taught me a new game, called Rummy," replied Caleb. "Oh, that's one of my favorites too," she said. Nico said to let you know he will be back over here in a little while. He had some chores to take care of for his father first, said Caleb. Chelina nodded. Caleb watched as Chelina applied the last layer on Peter's leg dressing. She looked up at Caleb as she was about to finish. I showed Martha how to make these. It's quite easy and she can show you how to do it too, explained Chelina. You're probably getting tired, I'll bet. Your cot's already out in the main room, and I put some blankets out there too for you both. It might get a little chilly by morning, said Chelina. Chelina finished the dressing, and then gently placed the back of her hand across Peter's forehead. No fever, that's good, she said, and then she blew out the lantern and turned to Caleb. I have just enough hot water in the pot for another cup or two of tea. Are you interested? Yes, please, replied Caleb. As he followed her to the kitchen, she handed him a cup and tea bag, then poured some hot water into his cup. There, I have a table outside behind the back of my house that I sometimes like to sit at in the evenings and drink my tea before bedtime. You are welcome to go out and have a seat. I will be out there in just a minute, insisted Chelina. Thank you, replied Caleb, sipping his tea. Caleb went outside and noticed another long wooden table that was just behind Miss Chelina's house. As he sat down and began sipping his tea. It was sassafras tea. He liked it so much that he decided he would have to find out how to make it himself. As he sat down at the table, he gazed around and immediately noticed a large pear-shaped pot that stood in the corner of her porch a few feet away from the house and next to a block wall. The large pot stood nearly 4 feet high and had a small fire going inside of it. It felt so good that he gently scooted his chair closer to the fire, trying hard not to make any noise that might wake any sleeping neighbors around them. Caleb wasn't sure why, but Nico's village seemed to be a lot quieter than their camp for some reason. Perhaps it was that the thick woods that surrounded their village on all sides had a way of blocking any extra noise that made it seem so quiet, but he noticed it on the walk back from Nico's house. This is my little retreat from the day, said Chelina, taking a short sip from her cup of tea, my favorite place to rest at the end of the day. Chelina started to sit, but then reached over to a small pile of wood on the opposite side of her porch and grabbed a couple of small pieces of wood and tossed them into the pot, immediately causing the fire to flame up. There, that should last long enough to bedtime, she said. Caleb looked up into the night sky, noticing the first quarter moon just beginning to dive below the western edge of the trees around the village. As he sipped his tea, he imagined what it would be like to visit such a place, recalling the pictures from the magazines that he had found in the cave of men walking on the moon and on Mars. For a moment, his imagination drifted off to such a place. It sure is beautiful, commented Chelina. What's that? The sky, the moon and stars, they begin to take you away as you stare at them to faraway places, don't you think? Chelina mused. She must be reading my mind, Caleb thought. Do you know people actually walked on the moon a long time ago? Chelina smiled, nodded, and sipped her tea. Yes, the world has changed a lot for us, Caleb, but who knows, maybe someday people will return and walk there again. Don't you think? Caleb frowned. You disagree? No, it's just that it all seems so, I don't know, out of reach, pondered Caleb, pointing to the moon. We have a hard time just moving around from one camp to another. Forget about trying to go across space to the moon, sighed Caleb. Don't be so easily discouraged, she continued. Everything important in life always starts with a dream and a vision. What's your dream, Caleb? Asked Chelina. My dream? Funny you should mention that, murmured Caleb, thinking about Chelina's question. My dream is to help people. I hate to see when people are hurt or suffering, confessed Caleb. When I was a little girl, I used to watch my grandfather, who was also a healer, and would help him when he had patients who were sick or injured, and it inspired me to want to be like him, confided Chelina. One day, I helped him deliver a baby boy, and that day changed my life forever. That was the day I decided to be a healer too. I also hated to see people suffer. But I don't want to be a healer, not like doctor that is, explained Caleb, continuing his thought. I want to help others to have hope in the future, continued Caleb. Years ago, my grandmother would tell me stories about our ancestors and how they were very spiritual people who believed in the balance of all things in heaven and earth. They always strove for order, observed Chelina, looking over at Caleb. I sense in you a feeling of wanting order as well in your life, and yet you are frustrated because you are not yet able to attain that order for which you desire. Caleb was silent, pondering what Chelina had just said. I have visions of things that are going to happen, but those visions are not always easy to understand, continued Caleb. I knew, for example, that we would meet your people in the woods, but at first my visions made your people seem violent and dangerous, confided Caleb. So, what changed? In my visions, I began to meet with my old self, and he tries to help, stammered Caleb, unsure of how to best explain it. He's your spirit guide then, remarked Chelina. Caleb looked puzzled. Chelina explained. Many of my people believe in the help of spirit guides that come in visions. These guides help lead them through life's many struggles, offered Chelina. Is that what you believe? Asked Chelina. Not exactly. We follow the teachings of Jesus. My family has always believed in following God's word and used the lessons in the Bible to guide our lives through our struggles, Caleb explained. Chelina nodded. I understand. You see, my grandmother was a born-again Christian, a very devout Christian, but my grandfather, well, he was a traditionalist, you might say, who followed the old ancient ways. They loved and respected each other very much. However, I remember hearing some very enlightening discussions between them when I was a little girl, smiled Chelina, finishing off the rest of her tea. There was silence as the two of them considered all that was being shared. A few moments later, Nico returned as well, and joined with them, drinking hot tea around the firepot. You know, Caleb, perhaps you should seek out your spirit guide, your older self, more often, in order to help guide you through your struggles. Sometime later, I can show you ways to do that whenever you feel you need to seek guidance from him, offered Chelina. Caleb nodded, finishing off the rest of his tea as well. Thank you, Chelina, for the tea, and for the conversation. You've given me much to think about, remarked Caleb, yawning slightly. I'm getting tired. I hope you don't mind. It's been a long day, and I think I'm ready to go to bed. Good night. Good night, Caleb, answered Nico and Chelina in unison, and pleasant dreams, smiled Chelina.
You have been listening to Caleb Elgin, The Rise of the Clans by David E. Farmer. Also available on Amazon Kindle. More chapters coming soon. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. Bye-bye.